If someone had told me a year ago that my wife would become my greatest fear, I would have laughed in their face. Sarah, the love of my life, who couldn't even sit through a horror movie without getting terrified, was the last person I'd ever imagined becoming a source of nightmares. But here I am, hiding in a friend's house, scared to death of the woman I thought I knew so well. So when she started acting strangely, it was completely out of character for her. One evening I was in the kitchen making dinner. I was chopping vegetables when I felt a prickling sensation at the back of my neck, as if someone was watching me. I turned around to see Sarah standing in the doorway, half hidden behind the frame. Only her eyes and the top of her head were visible. "Hey Sarah, what are you doing?" I asked with a chuckle. She didn't respond. She just stared at me with wide eyes. After a few seconds, she slowly retreated behind the wall, disappearing from view. I shook my head, bemused, and continued cooking, chalking it up to her being playful. A few nights later, I woke up in the middle of the night. I reached over to find Sarah's side of the bed empty. Concerned, I got up to look for her. As I walked down the hallway, I saw her peeking at me from behind the bedroom door. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, her mouth stretched into a grin. "Sarah, are you okay?" I asked, feeling a knot of unease form in my stomach. She didn't answer. Instead, she slowly backed away, her eyes never leaving mine. My unease grew, but I tried to dismiss it as her trying to be silly. However, her behavior continued to escalate. One afternoon I came home from work to find Sarah peeking at me from behind the living room curtains. Her eyes tracked me as I moved, but she remained silent. It was unnerving, and I didn't know what to make of it. "Sarah, this isn't funny anymore," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't reply, just slowly closed the curtains, hiding her face. That night I lay in bed, unable to sleep. I felt like I was living in a nightmare, but I couldn't bring myself to confront her directly. Then came the worst incident. I was in the shower, washing off the grime of the day. The bathroom was filled with steam and the water was comforting. As I rinsed my hair, I felt that familiar sensation of being watched. I opened my eyes to see Sarah peeking at me from behind the shower curtain. Her entire head was inside the shower, her long, wet hair plastered against her face. Her grin was impossibly wide, her eyes bloodshot and wild. I screamed and stumbled back, slipping on the wet floor. Sarah didn't move, didn't blink. She just stared at me with that terrifying grin. Her teeth were bared and they looked sharper than I remembered, as if she had filed them to points. "What the hell, Sarah? What are you doing?" I shouted, my voice shaking. She slowly withdrew her head from the shower, her eyes never leaving mine. I scrambled out of the shower, grabbing a towel to cover myself. I heard her leave the bathroom, the door closing softly behind her. I stayed in the bathroom for what felt like hours, trying to make sense of what was happening. The next day, I decided I couldn't ignore it any longer. I sat Sarah down and asked her about her behavior. She looked at me with genuine confusion, claiming she had no memory of any of the incidents. Her concern seemed real, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Over the next few days, things got worse. I started finding Sarah in the most unexpected places, always watching me with that unsettling grin. I called her mother, hoping for some insight, but got none. Her mother was just as perplexed and concerned, suggesting we seek professional help. One evening, I decided to stay with my friend Jake to get some distance and think things through. I told Jake everything, and though he was skeptical, he let me stay. That night, I woke up in a cold sweat. I felt the now familiar sensation of being watched. I turned over to see Sarah's face pressed against the bedroom window, staring in at me. Her grin was wider than ever, her eyes gleaming with a sinister light. Her skin looked pale, almost gray, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. I jumped out of bed, heart pounding, and ran to the door. "Jake! Jake, she's here!" I yelled. Jake came running, but when we looked out the window, Sarah was gone. The only trace of her presence was a smudge on the glass where her face had been. The following morning I received a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of me sleeping, taken from inside the house. The message read, "I'm always watching." I knew I couldn't go back home. I couldn't be near Sarah until I figured out what was happening. I stayed with Jake for a few more days, but the texts kept coming. Photos of me, sometimes sleeping, sometimes going about my day, all with the same message. "I'm always watching." I changed my number and decided to stay with my parents in a different city. I hoped the distance would help, but the fear never left me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Sarah's wide, unblinking eyes and that terrible grin. I never went back home. I couldn't bring myself to face whatever had taken over my wife. The Sarah I knew and loved was gone, replaced by something I couldn't understand. All I could do was try to move on, always looking over my shoulder, haunted by the memory of her watching me. If someone had told me that my life would turn into a nightmare, I would have laughed. But now, living in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder, I can't help but wonder if I'll ever truly be free of her watchful eyes.